our solidarity is our future. If we can't stick together and expand the franchise for people and make sure that the right to vote is singularly protected and that people have the right to go to college where they want and they have the right to live in the community of their choice and be able to raise their children.
Welcome to Pod Talks. Pod Talks is a project of protecting our democracy, where we bring together the best minds in New Jersey and beyond to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing our democracy, our institutions, and our personal freedoms. I'm Sean Spiller, Chair of Protecting Our Democracy. Joining us today are three leading advocates in New Jersey who met during their days of student activism at Rutgers University. Staci Berger, President and CEO of the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. Christian Estevez, New Jersey Legislative and Political Director for District 1 National Communication Workers of America. And Trevor Phillips, Jr., Manager, Office of the Director, Economic and Housing Development, City of Newark. Staci, Chris, Trevor, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate
it. Pleasure.
All right, let me tell our listeners a little bit more about you. Staci Berger is the President and CEO of the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey, a statewide association of over 270 community-based organizations and individuals that focuses on creating affordable housing, revitalizing communities, and improving the climate for community development in New Jersey. Prior to joining the network, Staci served for 9 years with New Jersey Citizen Action, where she went from being an organizer to the political and legislative director. Staci serves on the Economic and Community Advisory Council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and is a member of the Housing Advisory Council for the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York. She has made multiple appearances on national media, including MSNBC, NPR, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. Born and raised in Plainfield, New Jersey, Christian Estevez is the son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. Christian graduated with a double major in labor relations and Latino studies from Rutgers University, where he later worked teaching classes focused on Latino workers in the United States. Christian began his career in the labor movement with the New Jersey State AFL-CIO in 2001. In 2009, Christian went to work for Communication Workers of America, CWA Local 1037, working his way up to Executive Vice President. That same year, he helped found and later served as President of the Latino Action Network, a statewide social justice organization. In 2021, Christian joined the National CWA, where he now serves as the New Jersey Legislative and Political Director for District 1. Christian continues his community activism, volunteering and serving on the boards of several organizations, including New Jersey Citizen Action, New Jersey Working Families Alliance, and the Latino Action Network. Trevor Phillips, Jr. is a graduate of Rutgers University, Livingston College in 97. He is a former educator with 18 years of teaching experience. In addition to his time in the classroom, Trevor has also coached girls basketball at both the high school and middle school levels for over 20 years. He's a passionate community organizer with over 30 years of both student and community leadership. Trevor has served as Senior Manager of Special Projects for the Office of Mayor Ras Baraka and currently serves in the Office of Economic and Housing Development for the City of Newark. Again, welcome to all three of you, and thank you for joining. I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and certainly loving the All Rutgers group that we've got with us today.
Are you,
right?
Rah.
Are you, rah. Full disclosure, I'm a Rutgers grad as well for everyone listening. So, well, let's start there. I understand that you did all meet at Rutgers University, each of you an activist in your own right, and then you kind of came together. And before we talk about how that happened, or maybe how you came together, maybe I'd ask each of you, why get involved? How did you become an activist? What were you working on, and how did it go from there? Staci, maybe I'll start with you.
I think I'm actually the oldest, which is weird, but because I'm still in my head, we're all still 19, right? Just in my head, though.
We'll take it.
I got involved pretty early on when I came to Rutgers. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was the first person in my family to go directly to college and came to New Jersey, where outside of the Garden State, most people think of Rutgers, or at least they did at that time, as a private college. It was most definitely headed in that direction, with what felt to me like a very marked shift towards corporate influence and decision making in the university, and the kinds of financial and investment decisions that the university was making. At the time that I got here, Rutgers was among the institutions championing divestment from South Africa. Edward Blaustein was the president at the time, and even though there had been tuition protests the year before I got here, what we call the first Bishop House, in 1989. In May of 1989, there was a very large takeover of Bishop House, and more than 100 people were arrested and carted off, and many of them, went through the legal system. And there was already a sense of activism on campus, both on campus itself and that the campus had a large role to play and shape the decisions that were happening around the world. I'm also a Livingston student, and was proud to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Livingston college experience a few years ago, right before the pandemic. And being on Livingston and being part of the student government there, which was just a natural fit for me, led to a lot of organizing and activism around making sure that the university was affordable to working class and middle class families, which it was becoming increasingly starting to become out of reach then. And as a parent of 2 college students now, I can tell you it is increasingly out of reach even more than it was back when we were there. So that was really my start, was being part of the Livingston family, looking towards the leaders who had been involved in the anti-tuition hike movement, many of whom had made a personal sacrifice and in some cases were injured during that event. And so there were quite a few demonstrations. There was also a gubernatorial race that was taking shape. Governor Florio at the time was running as a pro-choice candidate, and I am blanking on the person that he beat, but the other guy lost. And so there were a lot of opportunities for young people to get involved on a variety of issues, and they all kind of converged later in my college experience. But at the time, it was really tuition and paying attention to what was happening in South Africa.
So, I mean, Chris, you're in there, obviously tuition, role in student government, and of course, some of the state issues going on, and even nationally. What was your story in terms of getting involved at Rutgers?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess for me, I had a different path coming into college the same year that my older brother, who's 8 years older than me, when he started at Rutgers in 1984, my family was going through a transition where my parents were separating. And so while he was entering college, we went from being lower, like working class, to like being, like poor, lost our house, moved into a small apartment, in the poor section of Plainfield. And literally I went from being like the youngest brother of a brother who was going into university to now being like an at-risk youth. And that's how I spent my entire high school, like elementary, middle school, and high school career, was, just barely surviving. And so, through a lot of interventions, which, we don't have time for here, I, graduated high school by the skin of my teeth and did not get into Rutgers. I got it, but I got a lot of help from the EOF department at William Patterson, and they helped me get into school. And I told them that, my goal was to go to Rutgers because my older brother went there. And I was very fortunate to have the EOF director there say, if that's what your goal is, I'm going to help you do it. And with my work, but plus her help, I was able to transfer by the next year. So I arrived at Rutgers September 1994, just happy to be there, just like, amazed that I was, that given all the things that I had gone through, that I was even there. I just wanted to be involved. I wasn't even trying to be an activist. I was just trying to do something. And I remember going to the student activities fair at Voorhees Mall. They had all the tables set up, and at William Patterson, I had been involved in All Lots, which is the Organization of Latin American Students. Again, not doing activism, just doing kind of cultural stuff, right? And we did some cool cultural stuff. I got to produce my first campus concert where I brought Dougie Fresh in. So I got to see what it's like to put on a concert and do all those logistics. And I was like, I want to do more stuff like that, right? But I was overwhelmed by the number of organizations at Rutgers. And Rutgers had 22 Latino student organizations at the time. And I'm like, where to go? Which one to do? And the folks at the Black Voice Carta Boricua, which is the one of the campus newspapers that was focused on the Black and Latino community, they saw my confused look and they're like, well, what are you looking to do? And I'm like, I'm just trying to figure this out. They're like, well, you know what? Come be part of our paper because we get to see it all, right? We get to go to all the events. You get a press pass, so you don't even have to pay to get in. All you got to do is go there, maybe snap a few pictures and write a small little blurb about it, and you get to check it all out. But I wasn't a journalist. I wasn't a photographer. So my first role was advertising manager. So I had to walk around downtown New Brunswick and ask small businesses to advertise with us so we can supplement our funding. And so I was doing that and thinking, this is how I'm going to be involved. Once in a while, I did take a few pictures at some parties, got my stuff published. I was really proud of that. And then we go off on winter break, right, in the '94. And when we come back in January '95, we hear about what happened with President Lawrence, where he called in a meeting. I guess it happened at the end of the previous semester, but we found out that he had made a comment saying that that students of color were genetically inferior, right? And he said that he was trying to figure out how to help us genetically inferior people, but we're like, wait a second, you're starting off with the premise that we're genetically inferior. And that enraged all of us. And I didn't even know what to do with that, but I saw that the people just like sprung to action. And I saw, people who I didn't even know their names yet, like Staci and Trevor, getting up there and leading the protest. And I got launched immediately from being like the guy trying to get a few advertisements in the paper to being sent to cover, protests and cover, meetings and all that kind of stuff. And at first I was like, I'm gonna make my contribution by covering this for the paper. I remember getting sent to a meeting of the senior leadership where I know Staci and Trevor were in that room, and I walk in there. I go, what does a reporter do? You go in with a little tape recorder, a notebook, and a pad and paper. And I set up my tape recorder and I get my pad out. And I remember Trevor looking at me and going like, brother, what do you think you're doing? And I'm like, well, I'm here to cover this. He's like, you can't record this meeting. And I'm like, okay, I'll turn it off. He's like, nah, you got to take the tape out and take the batteries out and lay it all on the table. We're here plotting. We're plotting, and we're not going to have this recorded from, and we don't even know who you are. And I'm like, fair enough. I took it all apart, and there I was. But really quickly, I wrote a few things and I was covering it, but really quickly I felt dissatisfied with just being the observer and the one writing about it, and felt that I had to be part of it. And I didn't go to journalism school, so I had not been trained on this, so I had no problem crossing that line from journalist to activist, and just getting involved. And pretty soon, but I was very junior, right? So I wasn't the one making decisions. These are the folks making the decisions. But when they said we were going to do an action, my job was to go out there and get people to show up. And this is before cell phones, before internet, before direct messaging, all this stuff. And when we had to get people out to an event, to a protest, whether that be the Rutgers UConn game, or we're going to shut down Route 18, or we're going to take over the president's building, the young students were given a list of people's dorm rooms, and you had to go knock on every door or call them up, but mostly knocking on every door. And I remember for the UConn game, knocking on every door, telling people, get down there, get your tickets, because we're going to take over this game. And by the time I went down to get my ticket, they were sold out. So I couldn't even go into the protest. I had to wait outside for it. So that was the beginning of me getting involved.
Well, listen, Trevor, I think we heard a little bit of your story in that answer, right? But maybe tell us a little bit from your perspective, how had you become involved, or what your role in the school was, and where it went from there?
Well, first of all, clearly I said the wrong bio in.
Me too.
Because I'm like, listen, okay, that wasn't the bio. They need you to be a little bit more specific as to which bio they wanted. But I've been a student organizer since I was a freshman at Rutgers. I didn't come to Rutgers to be a student organizer. I came to Rutgers fall of '92, and I just, came to go to college. I had an interest in, definitely learning more about Black history. So I came in, wanted to be a psych major and, take as many African studies courses as I could. And then, like Chris, they have the different fairs and stuff out there for different organizations. Um, some of my brothers that, we're still friends 30 years later, got me to join this organization called 100 Black Men of Rutgers University. And from that organization, also freshman year joined an organization up here in Newark called Black Media Force, that was founded by the current mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, when he was at Howard. So at that time, there was a chapter at Howard, there was a chapter in Harlem, and then there was a chapter here in Newark. And I joined that chapter the spring of '93. So, we were organizing on campus and here in Newark the entire time I was in college. Chris walked right into the fire when he came out of William Patterson. And it was Rutgers when we were there was a beautiful place for student activists like ourselves. We have a love-hate relationship with the university. It's funny now to go back and go to these different Rutgers things, because when we were there, they didn't want us there. If we made too much noise, Staci was getting kicked out of the Board of Governors meetings. We were, her and I were in student government together for Livingston College. And it's funny. Chris, I didn't even remember that's how we met. I know it was around the whole protest thing, but I did not remember that story. It's funny. But so that the protest of the game is University of Massachusetts. They were the number one team in the country at the time in basketball. They were playing us. We had been protesting, about what President Lawrence had said, and the basketball players were supposed to not play, and the university forced them to play, threatened their scholarships. Like one of the guys, he was from Queens, and his father was having some heart conditions at the time, and he called me up. I went to his room. He said, Trev, he said, I got to play. He said, the AD called me into his office, said that, he didn't think it'd be a good idea to have to call my father and tell him that I lost my scholarship because I didn't want to play in this game. And he was like, my father, he's having, he had a heart attack, he's having heart, whatever. He said, I can't do that. I said, brother, I said, you got to take care of family first. I said, don't even. And he, like one by one, they would pick them off. And they will all call us and, apologize for having to be, coerced into playing. And we said, listen, we don't hold that against you. Y'all were at least man enough to call us and let us know. We could tell that they didn't want to, but they were forced. I didn't have a scholarship for them or a team for them to go play on, so I couldn't be mad at them. And there was only two of them that were left. And they finally got them to play, but they sat out the first quarter, and then they put like black armbands in solidarity around their arms when they went into the game. But the ironic thing about it is that whole game got shut down because of one sister from Newark, as a matter of fact, who wasn't even a student organizer. Like Jackie was just, one of the people on campus, hanging out, chilling, going to parties and whatnot. But she was mad at what the president said. And when she came up to me at halftime because we were like not sure what we were going to do, because the plan was that the players were not supposed to play. But we had a whole mass of students there ready to protest and do something. And we were, the organizers, we were standing up on the deck, looking over the court, trying to figure out what to do during halftime. And the next thing, she walked up to me and she was like, what's going on? I said, we trying to figure it out, Jack. She was like, she huffed and puffed, said, all right, time for this, and walked away. And next thing we heard was a whole bunch of commotion and noise. And we looked over the bench. So people started running. We looked over the banister. Jackie's sitting in the middle of the court, Pocahontas style, with her two big Pocahontas braids, legs folded in the middle of the half court. And the RUPD was trying to get it to come off, but they had mobilized to stop all of us. So they were literally stationed all along the perimeter of the court, but they were looking for a mass of students to storm the court, which is what they prepared for. Jackie walked straight past them and sat down in the middle of the court. They didn't even look at her. And, at that point in time, that created the distraction that we needed, and everybody else just bum rushed the court. And before you knew it, the entire court was full of, I guess, 200 and something, 300 and something students, with signs, all types of other business. Rutgers, we got, arrested later for some other protests. I was one of the folks that got taken to court, Piscataway Police Department, protesting, surveillance. We had the FBI on campus. There were bombs that were going off in the library. They tried to blame us. And we were like, we're protesting to get the hours extended while we set off bombs in the library.
Right.
So it was absolute insanity. But it gave us a crash course as to what the real world looks like when you open your mouth and don't do what you're told.
Hmm. Well, maybe, Staci, I'll go back to you. Just, hearing that story, powerful how all that comes together, and I love that story. Chris and Trevor first meet there, and what that looks like, and then of course how that evolved. But Staci, where and this was your involvement, because I know you all kind of came together on this, and of course student government, you guys worked together in that space, but. How did you see everything kind of come together and you guys start working together?
So we had the least formal, completely unofficial, off the books organization called the Campaign for an Affordable Rutgers Education, or CARE. We had no money. We were not an authorized student organization in any way. We met at the top of what was then the Student Center in the S Lounge, without, it was just an open space. And we were really about as grassroots got. And I think probably still gets. And it was not exclusively, but it was more so than not primarily white working class students. And I think we had a real bond of unity and partnership with 100 Black men and with some of the Latino organizations on campus, that especially the newspaper, that was playing a leading role in organizing folks. And we kind of partnered together to figure out where we could mobilize people and where our synergies and our unity was. And it really was around before President Lawrence made that egregious, racist, horrible statement. It really was around trying to stop the university from raising tuition and shifting the tuition increases into fees. All of a sudden there were a tremendous number of fees that didn't used to be there. There was a computer fee, there was a dorm fee, there was a housing fee on top of your regular fee. If they could stick a fee on it, they did. And it was just making what had been a fairly affordable public education experience for many working class and middle class families in New Jersey really out of reach. So we were taking a lot of direct action. What Chris and Trevor described was not like a grand plan that we had. It was mostly, as Trevor described it, where we were like, oh no, our first plans A, B, and C did not go well. What are we going to do now? And that was really how we found ourselves in Bishop House the second time in the spring of 1992, where a bunch of us there was a big rally to freeze tuition and put 3 student votes on the Board of Governor, which I will highlight is still a student demand. All of these many years later, there is no student representation on the university's Board of Governors, which is a travesty and undemocratic and should be fixed. I mean, that is an easy thing for the university to do, to engage the students that spend a lot of time and money there. But we had this rally to freeze tuition, put 3 student votes on the Board of Governors, and we marched down to Bishop House, and we really didn't know how to end it. So we just went into the building and figured we'd figure that out. And then somebody figured out that there were no administrators or police or anybody else in the building. And so we locked the doors to the outside, and then we took over the building for 2 days and tried to get meetings and commitments. Generally did as much as we could to encourage students to support those calls for lower tuition. At the time, it was a tuition freeze. We hadn't incurred the kind of debt that so many young people have today, which makes it difficult for them to lead productive, full lives because they're paying off student debt. so in direct relation to the increase in tuition that we were trying to stop. So in some ways, I feel like we were a little ahead of our time, but we didn't cross the finish line to make tuition fair and affordable. We were calling for, both a tuition freeze and free tuition, that college education should be free because it's a requirement in so many fields to be able to get a job. So if we provide K through 12 education, we felt that we should provide an opportunity for higher education for anybody who wants one. And so we had a continuum. I started a little earlier than Trevor and Chris, but we all continued to organize in the New Brunswick area. Many of us lived there and worked tirelessly in that area to establish an elected school board and a civilian police review board, which was something that the folks in Newark, that 100 Black men in Black New Force, and now Mayor Baraka, but at the time, mayoral candidate Raz Baraka 25 years ago was calling for a civilian police review board, and we're still calling for a civilian police review board, and for that enabling legislation to be passed by the state so that our communities have more control over how they're treated and how we interact with law enforcement, especially people of color. So there are a lot of things that we have worked on together, the three of us and a lot of our allies and friends and people we consider family. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the death of a friend of ours, and so a little half a minute of silence for Heavy, right? Was a tremendous organizer and a real good friend to Trevor and so many of us, and worked for the city of Newark. But we all met at Rutgers, and we formed bonds in our young days that I think have carried us into our professional careers and our families, and so I think we've built that kind of multiracial, multi-ethnic solidarity around the whole state of New Jersey that has made a difference, I think, in the kind of policies and politics we see now. And because we have that shared experience, and Rutgers has that shared experience, they know not to arrest people, directly, right? They arrest them later, right, Trevor? That's what they did to us in Bishop House. And then they send you a summons 2 weeks later that says you've been arrested and you have to come to court. There were a bunch of us that were served papers after the 92 Bishop House takeover. There were 21 of us that were charged. Nobody flipped. Nobody turned on each other. Multiple people were offered a plea deal of a lot less if they testified against others of us. And nobody took that deal, which was tremendous. And some of the people who got caught up in that arrest scheme were like, as Trevor was describing, Jackie, people who were just there, not Jackie herself, but other folks who were just there. They came to the rally, they came in the building, and the next thing they knew, they were being threatened with expulsion, as much as 4 months of suspension, or a semester of, rather 4 semesters of suspension, or full expulsion from the university for just exercising their democratic rights to be heard. So there was a lot of tumult in those times, and people did actually come to Rutgers because they read about us in the paper. I had some folks stop me and say, I came here because I want to be involved in what's going on with the Campaign for Affordable Rutgers Education, and the other organizations that are working on these issues.
Chris, let me ask you then, hearing some of the battles that were going on, some of the successes, some of the challenges that to this day still remain. And of course, that being a place to kind of grow and learn, and then take that into what everyone does now. What do you look at as some of your biggest victories, from that time, and certainly what have you taken from that time into the work that you do now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was during that process, it was during those protests that I started to learn the connection between what the president said, and the impact it had on the resources that we were receiving or not receiving. We were seeing cuts in funding for African studies, for Latino studies. We were seeing, like the places that were supposed to be for us, like the Paul Robeson Center, not getting the stuff it needed. We didn't have the same resources, in our student center that the other student centers had. We saw that the best, the professors who really were teaching us the best stuff were not getting tenure, and they were being pushed out. And, so at first, I just heard, the insult, But as I continue to organize and listen to students who had been there before and who had been part, like Staci, who had been really working on the issue of affordability, right, and about the funding and all that, and then and then even in future years, you start seeing all this like investment in the football stadium and all this stuff, and you're like, well, you got money for that, but you don't have money for us. And I was an EOF student. I saw how disinvestment in EOF and a move away from that, how it was hurting access to students of color, to poor students of color, especially get to come into the university. And so for me, it wasn't just the insult. It wasn't just like this president said this thing that he had a slip of the tongue. I mean, usually when people's tongues slip, they say what they really mean, right? And so, so it made me understand that like what was behind all of this stuff, right? And that it wasn't true that they didn't have enough money for these things. It's just that these things weren't a priority because we didn't matter, right? And so, and that type of thing echoes in our current, our current situation where we have to go out in the streets and hold up signs that say Black Lives Matter, right? We were seeing back in the 90s how Black lives and Latino lives did not matter, right, to these folks. And so for me, it was both. It was like, an awakening, an understanding of like what was really going on and how that if we didn't fight for ourselves and our communities, nobody else would. So we had to be there, we had to do it, and in partnership and in collaboration with all students, white students who did care, right? So it wasn't that like Latino and Black versus white people, because we had white students who were out there and risking a lot to fight for what was right. And for me, it was like at the end of that, watching people get expelled from school, watching people lose things immediately. It was disheartening because at the end of that year, and after a bunch of people graduated, President Lawrence was still there, right? But those of us who were still there, we resolved to not give up the fight. We started to understand the value of like protracted struggle, and luckily I was very fortunate to have had mentors right around that time, like Amiri Baraka, North Mayor's father, right, who we worked together on projects like the newspaper Unity and Struggle, where there were folks from Black Nia Force on that, and my group on that, and others, and being around Amiri and learning about history, long-term history, and how things don't happen in one semester, right? It is protracted struggle, and you got to keep at it, right? And that there's going to be setbacks, and you got to keep pushing forward. So for me, I think it was like 2002 when Governor McGreevey came in, and a lot of folks who supported him for governor, made it clear that one of our demands in exchange for supporting him was that he had to do something about Rutgers and President Lawrence. And so, I believe that officially President Lawrence stepped down, but my understanding is under the pressure from the new governor saying you're going to go one way or the other, right? So for me, that was years later after we had all graduated. I saw that as a victory, not just for what we did during that semester, but the work that we did afterwards, the students that we mentored after us, and did everything we could to have them continue to put the pressure, right? Not let him off the hook, not let the administration off the hook. And that every chance they got, they had to call him out. And one of the things that McGreevey, I remember him saying about President Lawrence and why he was putting pressure on him to step down, was that he had gotten reports that President Lawrence over the past 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it may be, was never seen on campus, right? We had successfully pushed him into hiding. So he was afraid to come out to places where he could be protested because the protests continued, right? And so that for me is is validation of what we did. And that if we continue that kind of work, we can make change. And I carried that type of thinking into everything I did after that for the next 25 years. So, or whatever. And so now when we fight for, social justice, obviously we want to have an immediate win, but I'm also thinking about, how what we do today, contributes to what we're going to see 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, and how we're going to look back on this and say that we made progress.
So, Trevor, let me ask you. We're hearing there, Chris is talking about victory, and one of the biggest victories being the legacy and those who come after you and the fight that they continue and eventually the maybe broader victory. But what do you see from your time as some of the biggest victories? And another thing Chris noted is the need for collaboration to be successful. Maybe how those two things kind of connect in your experience, and then what you've taken with you from there.
I think one of the things that a lot of people don't know that weren't on campus at the time was that the reason that we were able to mobilize the way that we were is that we had already been organizing. Like, it was going down spring semester that year, whether Lawrence said anything or not. We had been planning that entire fall semester, all of this multicultural coalition to go after exactly everything that Staci laid out. Like we were I remember we were at we were on Douglas, 100 Black Men and Buapu, which is our sister organization. We were meeting at the Africana House, which is like one of the dorms and stuff, for the women over on Douglas. At the time, it was an all Black dorm. And we, in the middle of our meeting, you hear this knock at the door. You hear a distinctly white voice at the other end of the door. So, yeah, hello, can I see such and such? And we all look at each other like, who the hell is that? Right? And it was Xavier answered, one of our brothers, man. It was Xavier came to the meeting to present the case as to why we should get involved in what was, already happening so far as student activism. And it was a conversation that we had to have, amongst ourselves, because, some people were like, well, that's not a Black issue. I'm like, listen, bro, if you don't think tuition is not a Black issue, something is wrong with you, But it wasn't just tuition. It was student rights at the time. They were trying to curtail our ability to protest, just simply, period, like outright. Basically rewriting the Constitution on campus. Like the audacity of some of the things. They had this thing called building on excellence and maintaining excellence, which were strategic draft plans that the university, paid consultants and drafted as to how they were going to organize the university for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And one of the things that we, spelled out and identified in there was that they were going to change they couldn't get rid of minority students, but they literally spelled out in the document that they were going to change the pool of minority students. So instead of getting minority students from Plainfield and East Orange and Newark and Camden and Philadelphia, where most of us have been coming from, they were going to get exchange students who they can go, like one of the basketball players whose father was ill, they can hold stuff over their head, your student visa, so in case you want to get too loud or think that you actually have rights, we remind you that you don't. So literally they wrote down that they were going to replace recruitment of quote unquote minority students from inner cities to international students. And we were like, wow, y'all had the nerve to actually put this in writing.
No shame.
We were just like we know you wanted to do it, but you actually put it in writing, like it was okay. Wow. So the thing that was beautiful at Rutgers at the time is that we literally had the multicultural coalition that the country in and of itself proposes itself to be, whether it be the Democratic Party, Republican Party, not so much the Republican Party, but Democratic Party likes to promote itself as, multicultural and all that stuff. But we had that with people actually in power, like everybody was represented. Everybody had an equal say, and ideas ruled the day. Like it wasn't about, it was put it on the table, let's discuss it. Those meetings were long. They weren't easy. Democracy is not easy, and it's not quick, it's not convenient, but it's necessary. And those meetings taught us and made us not only better organizers, but better people. We fought and argued in 100 Black Men meetings for 2 hours every Thursday night at the Paul Robeson Center. So it wasn't nothing new to us, but now you're, expanding the argument and the conversation and the ideas. And, that's where I learned how to debate and how to discuss. I learned more stuff as a student activist than I learned as a student, to be very honest with you. Like Kwame Ture, former Black Panther, had came down to UPenn in the midst of all of those protests that year in '95 and asked the students at UPenn that paid him to come speak if they could reach out to us and ask us to come down because he wanted to meet a cohort of us and, to talk to us about what we were doing. And, I'm Trinidadian. So the minute that we got the call, my democracy, cape went out the window. I was like, look, Stokely called Mike and Colin and he wants some students. I'm going. I said, I got a Trinidadian passport to trump all the rest of y'all. I'm out. So we went down there and met with him that night. We, like Staci said, we had professors that were talking about other professors from the other side of the world watching the news and calling them and sending them emails. Hey, tell your students to keep up the good fight. We see them. And this woman was in like Thailand or something. Like she was literally on the other side of the planet. So like we learned a lot of things so far as organizing, how to build relationships. And that's why we like Staci and Chris and I see each other at different events. And it's like we right back on campus again. Staci and I went to Bernie Sanders when he spoke at Rutgers and hung out for the day. It was great, and it was those bonds never fade because they're built in struggle. They're built, and it's funny that Chris said what he said about the whole protracted, struggle, that the Baraka House is where I learned that term. And it's ironic enough because that's been my email address for decades. Protracted one is my email address. And I learned it there, and I looked at Mr. and Mrs. Baraka at the time in awe because many of the other activists, the former Panthers and the other Black radicals and white radicals that came through to the Baraka House, most of them were dead, or in jail or in exile. There was a handful of people that made it through the 60s and the 70s and that were still organizing, Kathleen Cleaver and a whole bunch of other folks that we had the pleasure of meeting, Angela Davis. And to see that Mr. and Mrs. Baraka were able to be as active as they were, be as grounded as they were, and still be in the town that they were actually doing their organizing in, and not just, college professors somewhere pontificating about freedom and whatnot. They were actually still fighting for it on the ground level, so much so that their son took up the banner and we're at City Hall now, So, I mean, and that struggle was also protracted. It took us 25 years. Every 4 years we ran, and more people. And we ran in '94 for the first time. We had student activists from everywhere up here. Staci would come up, Chris would come up. We had students from down in DC, students all Rutgers. We had students from everywhere flooding the city, knocking on doors, ringing bells, passing out literature, running through the streets, making noise, and bands and music, and it was energy. And then the thing is that what I learned at Rutgers above everything else is that you can make a difference anywhere you want to. You can change anything you want to if you put in the time and you put in the work and you get enough people to agree with what you think and believe. You can make anything happen.
That's, Staci, let me ask you this. You talk about anything, making anything happen, and your experience that you had, and certainly working in collaboration, with everyone here. What would you say now? Would that be your message, or what version of that would be your message to, someone on a college campus now, an activist? Yes, we talk about the struggle, but also the side of with that struggle and continued effort, there can be success. Looking at what you achieved, looking at what you do now, what you brought with you, what would you say to an activist on a college campus now? And certainly with everything that we're seeing, right? There's a lot that's tied in nationally and internationally, and kind of all those things, kind of coming together. But what would your conversation, what would your advice be?
I would say to echo what Trevor said, to not give up. It's a long struggle. Chris, I found this button. Actually, somebody sent it to me. Mark Perkis sent it to me. It says we have a two-lane. We have a two-lane university, two-lane president at a four-lane university, and that was kind of the slogan we came up with when they brought Fran Lawrence from Tulane. We were like, from Tulane, like that's a very small, very private, very different kind of university than a multiracial, multi-ethnic, diverse, three-city campus situation that Rutgers was in the 90s. And, we knew at the time that he was not the right hire and that the university needed more democracy, not less. And that, I think, is the goal, or rather the lesson that I learned at the university and what I've learned to take with me into my professional work and my community organizing, which I'm still doing in my spare time, is more democracy, not less. And Trevor said it, it's hard. Some of those meetings were really difficult. You don't get to build unity with people without having difficult conversations and struggling over understanding each other's background and understanding each other's future and where everybody has come from and where they want to go. But our solidarity is our future. If we can't stick together and expand the franchise for people and make sure that the right to vote is singularly protected and that people have the right to go to college where they want, and they have the right to live in the community of their choice and be able to raise their children and stay in the community that they grew up in if they want to, that we have those rights, that those are fundamental to our democracy, and they're what makes our communities and our country, have the promise of being the promise of doing that. We have not realized it. And that is why conversations like this and protecting our democracy, right, is so important now more than really ever. I feel like I say that in every election, but I feel like this is the most important election of my lifetime because it's true. Every election makes a difference, and it gives us a chance to weigh what we've done and how well we've communicated our vision for the values that we share of solidarity and prosperity and inclusivity, that we rise together. Every election is an opportunity to talk about those values and our vision. And when we sit them out or we don't have what we need to be successful in them, it costs people real dollars and real opportunity because we have leaders who make decisions that are not in the best interests of the communities that they represent. And so when we were at Rutgers and we saw them build a bell tower and put a fancy, huge bell on top of the tower of a library they were closing, like people can see for themselves that those decisions don't make sense, right? If you have enough money to put a bell that nobody's ever going to touch on top of a library that people now can't go into because we don't have enough money to keep the library open, people are smart. They can see for themselves that those are not good choices. And so we took over the library, and we had probably one of the only study-ins ever held on a college campus where we just studied instead of letting them close the library, because education was fundamental to our experience there. We came to Rutgers to learn. And some of that learning happened in a classroom, and a lot of it happened on the street. And especially a lot of it happened at Broward Commons, which was a free speech area. And the city of New Brunswick actually tried to restrict the rights of students and community members to gather there. They required a permit for any setup of more than 10 people. And so we had a party without a permit, and we had a picnic without a permit, and we had a rally we had a protest without a permit, and they weren't able to enforce their draconian and undemocratic laws in any fashion because we were willing to say, this is wrong and we are not going to tolerate it. And we are going to put ourselves and our families in a lot of ways on the line. Every one of us had parents who struggled, to send us to school. It was not a slam dunk for any of us. Right. And so every time we took that step forward to say, this is not just for us, it's for everybody we represent. It's for the people who helped us get here. Right. That's what we've always done. And part of what I learned and what I would say to students is, don't be afraid. There are people who will back you up. There are people who will stand with you. Recently, there were, students who were threatened with expulsion and suspension because they were fighting for workers at Rutgers to have a decent minimum wage, right? It was the Fight for 15. The university has the same playbook they've probably had for 30 years or 40 years, which they really honed with us, which was send in the cops afterwards and make it something separate. They didn't want people to get drawn out of buildings the way they did in Bishop House of 1989, right? They didn't want the civil disobedience and all of the media coverage that goes along with it. If we'd had Twitter or X or any of the social media tools that young people have now, I can't even imagine what we would have done, right? And people would page you 911, and that meant like back right away. It's really important. Which happened when there were hate crimes, right? At the Paul Robeson house, there was somebody left some some people left some pretty horrible things there, and that was a 911 pager, and a bunch of us came down and did what we needed to do to support our friends, our sisters and brothers at 100 Black in Bawabu. So we built that solidarity, and we have to be able to do that and continue to do that. We took over Millidoler Hall, and Angela Davis came in 1991 when Amiri Baraka was denied tenure in the English department, right? He was not given tenure, but he was told he could have tenure in a different department, but not in the English department where he was actually right. They weren't quiet about their racism. They said the quiet part out loud, just like they had no shame about putting it into a strategic plan, right? As a student at Livingston, where we were the result. Livingston was the culmination of the 1967-68 riots in Newark for access to education for low income families, and particularly people of color. And I came from Boston. I just knew that seemed like the best. It seemed like the best campus, and it turned out that today it is the best campus. All the kids want to live there, which is sort of reminiscent of what Mayor Baraka talks about, where young people moving into urban areas where there's activity and it's new and it's fun and there's lots of different cultures coming together. People want that. At the time, we called Livingston the Rock, and we still do, right, in our heart, because nothing, they cut the whole thing, and there was not a whole lot there. But we made something where there was not a lot. We had a legacy of student organizers who were fighting against the CIA and incursions into Central America, the folks at CISPIS and the folks at Student Action Union. And so we built on that. And I think we did what we could without any social media, which is insane. We used to send out a press release a week in advance, and we'd fax it. We thought faxing was the greatest invention. So we learned that things change and that we can do the best we can with the resources we have if we stick together and we keep fighting for the things we all believe in.
Well, Chris, I'll let you touch on that too. Are you inspired by what you're seeing on campuses now? What are you seeing that's impactful or that you look at today?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, I want to say that if I didn't say it earlier, I also was a Livingston student and I lived on the Rock. And I don't know if it's something in the water at the Rock that made us all the activists we were. I think part of it had to do with the fact that we came in, we knew the history, we knew how Livingston was created, and also we also knew how the rest of the university kind of looked down on us, right? And neglected Livingston. So we saw we saw it firsthand, right, on Livingston because of the way that, and we knew that it wasn't just because of our location, because on that side of the river, right across the highway was Bush campus. So it wasn't that we weren't in New Brunswick; it's that we were the place where poor students of color were concentrated at. We were the campus that was born out of protest, and that had to be stomped down. And so we made sure that did not go away. We made sure that any whisper of the painting over of the mural in what's the name of that hall from Lucy Stone Hall, right, where Lucy Stone Hall had the murals painted after the protests in the 60s, right, where I remember that some of the murals showed police with batons beating up protesters, right? So we knew what we came out of, right? And I see that it's great to see that students, sometimes, it's disheartening because you go through periods where there's maybe not a lot going on. And a few years after I left, I went, I kept trying to go back, and there was times when, some of the student leaders reverted back to being more about the parties and about the social stuff. But then there'd always be that little group of students who would come back and say, no, this is our opportunity to make a difference. And they would revive that spirit of struggle. And that will always give me, a lot of hope. And so that's who I always try to work with. And when you look at the things that we've accomplished, and I'll talk about in the Latino community, the immigrant rights community, right? When we got in-state tuition for undocumented students in 2013. Later on, we got tuition aid for those same students. And then down the road, we got we were able to pass in New Jersey driver's licenses for undocumented, right? Students and Rutgers and throughout university throughout New Jersey were at the forefront of those struggles. They were doing this on campus, and they were dreaming big about what could be done, even when other people weren't doing it. So for me, it's not just about. I mean, it is about them struggling for their rights and access to resources on campus. But it's always like it fills me with a lot of hope every time I see them, realize their power and their ability to, from their campuses, spark movements that have an impact on a whole state and on a whole nation. So, and this is a time for them to do it, right? They have all that energy. Right now is when they're thinking about all these things, and when some of us get a little older and we have a few kids and we're trying to figure out, who's picking the kids up from what, right? Like they're in an environment where they can really put a lot of energy, not just into their studies, but into thinking how they view the world as it is, and to dream about it, how they think it should be, and then figuring out what they're going to do to make that dream a reality, right? And not just for themselves in a selfish way in terms of, I want to get rich, I want to be a CEO, I want to be a baller, whatever, right? But it's more about like, how do I make this a better democracy, a better place for all people? And so to see them doing that, like I said, fills me with hope and makes me want to create or help create more places for them to do that work. So Latino Action Network, we're constantly, looking out for young people, students coming up and trying to like mentor them and foster them and give them and help create opportunities for them to express that energy, right? And also protect them the way that some people, worked to protect us. Because when we took over buildings and we did all these things, right, there were lawyers who came and did pro bono work, right? And so over the years, when students have done those things again, right, we call them up and said, hey, what do you need? And if you don't know what you need, one of the things you need is some lawyers, and we're going to set them up for you, right? And you also need pizza. So we just had some pizza delivered to you guys. And this is, so I think that we have a continued role in helping students like have that space to become what they want to be and become the change in the world that they want to see.
Well, putting that all together, I guess, Trevor, I'll give you the last word here as we kind of wrap up. Hearing Staci talk about more important than ever, democracy on the line. Elections meaning so much. The work that everyone continues with now. Listening to Chris and the impact that you have in college and that energy, but still needing to keep that going when you're fighting these fights into adulthood here. I guess wrapping up with you, do you think these are the same fights? Are they different fights that you are fighting now? Everyone's fighting now, and how does that relate to making sure we do protect that democracy that seems to be with every election, more and more on the line?
Like Chris said, what we learned from the Barackers, struggle is protracted. Like you can never take away the severity of that statement. It's an ongoing, everlasting fight. What our job is to play our role. Like Franz Fanon said, like each generation out of relative obscurity has a mission to either fulfill it or betray it. And we have to take that. I like to tell folks, like, whether you're black, brown, yellow, red, white, doesn't matter what color you are, there's struggle and injustice that we all face in different manners. And then sometimes they overlap. It's everybody's responsibility to take that baton and pass it, and not just pass it forward, but pay it forward, like Chris was talking about. Our elders open doors for us to be able to walk through. Our job is not to worry about kicking down doors for other people. Our job is to walk through the doors that were kicked down for us and create new institutions now. You don't have to fight to get access to City Hall. We're in charge of it. So now that you're in charge of it, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to make it better? You don't have to fight to be a part of the university anymore. You don't have to fight. The president of Rutgers is black now. You don't have to. What are you going to do once you get the power that you said you wanted? You can be a CEO, whether you're a woman, you're Latino, or whatever. When you become one, what type of CEO are you going to be? Are you going to help the environment? Are you going to help your community? Are you going to help people? Are you going to, make the world a better place? Or are you going to continue to do business as usual because all you ever wanted to do was to be, to have a seat at the table and not change what was being served? So, all of us happen to come together at Rutgers at the ideal time to create not only the lasting impact that we had on campus, but in the world. We're all in our own separate, lanes doing the same work we were doing as student activists because we were called to. Our spirit, listen, I don't know how to do anything else. I don't want to do anything else. And the only thing that I would say to young student activists that are coming up now and young activists, period, learn the value of the skills that you have. Your skills aren't just defined by whatever your bachelor's or your master's is. Organizing is a skill. It is a skill set that is second to none. And you have to learn to, first of all, appreciate your skill set. And you also have to learn how to monetize it. I think one of the things that we didn't understand as young organizers is that the revolution has to be paid for. That's not free. Like that pizza and them lawyers cost money. You have to have somewhere to meet. You have to be able to have cell phones and computers and access. The people that you're fighting against, if you're fighting against a multi-billion-dollar apparatus, and you can't beat that apparatus on goodwill and intention, and being down for the struggle. It takes more than that. So we have to learn how to really organize full out and be able to fund the movements and create the organizations that we want and fund them. I think LeBron James, to me, is a very, good example of something that's very, he's taken his basketball revenue and has made movies, built schools. That's what it's about. So our job now, to me, is to take the baton that the Marion Amina Barakas and the Stokely Carmichaels and Lolita LeBrons and William Kunstler's and everybody that came before us in the 60s and the 70s, to take the baton that was passed to us and the doors that were opened and continue to build institutions that help support people and the betterment and the good of just humanity in general.
Well said. And with that, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to kind of reminisce about your college days, but really talk about the battles and fights that you guys were in together, and certainly the success that you had and the lasting legacy, and how you've taken that into what you're doing now, and lastly, why it's so important that we continue to do so. So I know there are certainly lots of challenges that we do face specifically to our democracy, but hearing about what you guys have done, what you continue to do is inspiring to me, and I know hopefully we're inspiring others through listening to this as well. So thank you all very much for taking a little time today. Really appreciate you being on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hail, the gang's all here.
I know, I feel like we need a reunion.
Exactly.